The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mac Show. On this week's show, former journalist Kevin Newman joins us to talk about today's misinformation threat, why facts matter, and what a new organization is doing to help. Jeff and I are also going to chat about untrustworthy AI, Ukrainian drones, TikTok alternatives, and lots more. We also explore AI models that are worth trying. And Jeff, it is so great to have you here in person in the studio, and you are wearing a Command N t-shirt.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's awesome to be here in person in Toronto to see your new studio. And it's hard to believe that it's been 20 years since we started our original video podcast, Command N, which was in Wired Magazine and everything. And to think that we're here a fifth of a century later is pretty cool. Today, I'm going to talk about why electric cars aren't the solution we want them to be on the other Mac. But first, we've got loads of new tech news for you. So let's get started.
News feed.
There's a fascinating new study by Anthropic, the makers of the Claude AI model, that calls into question whether you can trust the explanations, Jeff, that AI gives about its own thought process. How does this work?
So it's pretty wild. Anthropic was exploring getting AI chatbots to explain their reasoning step by step about how they got to an answer. And unfortunately, what they found is that AI will lie to you about stuff like that.
How do they actually know that the AI is lying? How do they determine that?
So it's totally interesting. They gave the AI subtle hints before asking them questions, and then they would ask the AI if it used those hints in getting to its answers. And the AI would frequently lie and say it didn't, even when there's occasions where it's quite obvious that it did indeed use that information to get to its answer. So it's really bizarre, but it's interesting. And I think, again, be skeptical about AI stuff.
Be skeptical. And I think there's lots of red flags. Yes, AI can be used in some pretty incredible ways. But this other story in terms of finding out how exactly people are using AI image generators, this one I think really took me by surprise.
Yeah, a security researcher basically stumbled upon an open database online belonging to an AI image generation firm that revealed the prompts that people used in it. And those prompts contained things like creating images of Ariana Grande, the Kardashians, and Beyonce de-aged to look like little children, and other disturbing sexual imagery. And thankfully, most AI tools have controls that make it so that you can't generate this kind of imagery. But I think what this shows you is what people will do with AI when you take away the guardrails, and that's not good.
It's really a perfect example of why we need AI guardrails in place when we talk about all different types of AI platforms. It's so critical to have those guardrails in place because there's always someone who's figured out how in a nefarious way to use the AI platform in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this just was floating out there in the web and had all the information of what people would use for prompts and some really disturbing sexual imagery stuff and all that. So yeah, so that's enough about that. But yeah, just again, I think it's a bit of a warning sign.
It absolutely is. So we're going to go to another part of the world. I was reading this story about drones being used in the Ukraine and Russia war, and we actually have some data about how prevalent they are.
Yeah, so Ukraine has really been leading the way for in drone development recently. It's produced more than 2 million small drones for its war efforts. Now, these are typically used for surveillance and things like that, but increasingly there are obviously combat and attack drones that leverage AI and things like that going on as well.
I think we've seen a lot of the stories in the media about Ukraine using drones. Russia is also using drones. What I didn't realize is that, according to this article in Fast Company, about 70% of Russian and Ukrainian casualties are actually because of these drones. 70% of these casualties. Also, in a recent New York Times article, they talked about this military drone use. And they said it's like having 1,000 snipers in the sky. So this really is a new era of warfare that we're seeing develop right in front of our eyes.
Agreed, and kind of terrifying. And all I have to think about is those weird AI dogs, and put some machine guns on their heads and let them start making decisions about who to shoot. And yeah, things get pretty scary pretty quick. On a lighter note, at least lighter compared to, assassin robot dogs, on last week's episode, we chatted about a new social media platform called says.us. Well, this week it looks like there's another option on the horizon called Skylight. And I just signed up for this. It's a TikTok kind of experience. It's built on the same tech as Blue Sky. And in fact, you use your Blue Sky login credentials to create your account, which is super handy and easy. And it's backed by Mark Cuban. So it should hopefully have some momentum getting out of the gate.
Yeah, this should be interesting to watch. I'm a huge fan of Mark Cuban, and I know he has, especially over the past couple of years, been looking to invest in alternatives to some of the platforms we see out there. So really excited to see something out there for people who maybe, aren't that keen on using TikTok.
And somebody with the heft behind them that they can actually attract the sort of critical mass of people that you need to make these platforms work, because this is not a technological hurdle anymore. It's about getting people to use the platforms.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of TikTok, we do just want to mention people have, of course, heard the news over the past couple of months about TikTok's American ownership. They are still looking for new owners. But what's also new is that President Trump had just announced that he is signing another executive order to actually give TikTok a little bit more time. Now, according to Euronews, there was a deal in the works. So there were some American investors who were going to buy part of TikTok. The original owners from China would still have a minority stake. But as soon as the tariffs were introduced by President Trump, Beijing actually stopped that deal entirely that was on the table and really kind of put that on pause.
Yeah, those tariffs are affecting everything. There's a funny story online about when they were trying to read the list of countries or different jurisdictions around the world that tariffs would be used on, or what the tariffs would be set for each of them. But it included things that were like subnational territories and things like that. So we don't deal in trade. It included an island populated only by penguins, who I'm pretty sure haven't been screwing the U.S. out of much. But it's a pretty crazy story, and people hypothesize that that was basically AI gave them that list instead of a human being going and saying, obviously, what we're really looking for is UN countries and stuff like that. So tariffs are affecting absolutely everything, even video games. Nintendo has pulled their Switch 2 pre-orders from the United States over Trump's tariffs. According to BBC, Trump says that his global tariffs will boost the U.S. economy and protect jobs, which I think we're already seeing. It's not going to do that. But Japan's prime minister called them a national crisis, and I think that is more truthful than anything Trump said about it.
And if we drill down a little bit further in terms of the effects of the tariffs on the tech community and the tech industry, in my newsletter this week, I shared an article from Quartz where a tech analyst said that these tariffs from Trump will actually set the tech industry back a full decade or more. Now, speaking of tariffs, Jeff, you're going to talk about cars next. So let's dive into that in The Other Mac.
The Other Mac.
Trump's tariffs cover a lot of ground, but one aspect that gets a great deal of focus is auto tariffs. So I'm going to take this opportunity to talk a bit about cars. Obviously, the Western world, but particularly the US and Canada, has had a century-long love affair with the car, to such a degree that as environmental concerns have become especially pressing in more recent years, some of the most vocal defenders of the environment have proposed solutions involving investing billions of dollars trying to establish domestic battery manufacturing industries and things like that. What has been mostly lost in this approach is the hard conversation about cars themselves being the problem. Now, there are many good reasons why personal vehicles will continue to exist, especially in rural areas, but it astounds me to see so many medium and large cities all across Canada and the United States mostly drop the ball on public transit. As one example, in my hometown of Halifax, the Premier in Nova Scotia just got rid of tolls on our two major bridges, sacrificing the government revenue to maintain those bridges so that cars can cross more easily. Meanwhile, the public transit pedestrian ferries that cross our harbors every day are regularly canceled because of a lack of investment from the government. So people can't rely on them, and traffic gets worse and worse. In urban settings, the losses aren't just environmental. Ever-increasing car traffic means more congestion, which means more wasted time, which means lost economic opportunity. In 2024, Toronto topped the list of the most congested cities in North America and was the third worst in the entire world. According to one study, it takes Toronto commuters an average of 29 minutes just to complete a 10-kilometer or 6.2-mile trip. And that's almost a minute worse than it was just the year before. In fact, Torontonians lost an average of 98 hours in 2023 due to rush hour traffic. If we're looking at a standard 40-hour per week job, that's like working an extra 2.5 weeks every year. Think of what that means in terms of the economic impact in a city of over 3 million people. So what else can we do to deal with this? Well, people might complain about bike lanes and the like making traffic worse than ever, but I think there's something more insidious than that contributing to slower traffic, namely the widespread use of smartphones by drivers. I mean, walk down the street and look at traffic, look at the cars. You'll no doubt see people on their phones, at best leading to long pauses before they rejoin the flow of traffic, and at worst, creating accidents that grind traffic to a halt. What you almost certainly won't see is anyone being ticketed for being on their phone, and so now we've got a generation of people who think it's okay not to be looking at the road while they drive. It's pretty clear that the police don't want to do that job, so politicians either need to force them to, or create some other means to punish people who break the law in dangerous ways every single time they get into a car. Unfortunately for those who try to do the right thing by taking public transit in big cities like Toronto, instead of seeing drivers' heads buried in their phones, they'll get to enjoy people smoking crack on the bus because of similar lack of governmental accountability. So, as our cities drown in personal vehicle traffic, making sure more of those cars are electric instead of fossil fuel powered is avoiding a core reality that big cities should not have to accommodate so much of their population wanting to drive around in their own cars to go to work every day. Moves like this could even help the housing problem by freeing up the massive amounts of space that car parking takes up in cities. So here are 3 things I think need to be done. 1, politicians need to get serious about investing in public transit. It's the most sensible place to invest in electric vehicles, and it can be the most effective solution to traffic congestion while also helping the environment, freeing up housing space, and positively impacting the economy. 2, we also need to insist that police forces invest an appropriate amount of time enforcing cell phone use while driving laws. And at the same time, how about ticketing anyone who blocks an intersection while you're at it? These things matter, and if politicians can't make cops do that, then they need to create some separate municipal enforcement unit that they could fund entirely from all the tickets you'd be able to write during every single rush hour in almost any city. And finally, driving isn't a right, it's a privilege. The only reason we can't more easily revoke licenses from people who don't deserve them, at least in cities, is because politicians have come up so reliably short on providing the public transit alternative that every decent-sized city should have. In conclusion, as we face an increasingly unpredictable world, let's take the opportunity to do some hard things right. So make sure you let your elected representatives know how you feel. I'm the other Mac. Keep your eyes on the road.
Up next, we chat with one of North America's top journalists about a new bot that will help everyday people find facts.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Dozens of journalists from across Canada are coming together this month to launch a new community and platform called Get Fact. Amber sat down with Kevin Newman, one of the founding members, to learn more about how they're trying to stop disinformation from distorting, dividing, and destroying the country.
Media Matters.
I am so excited to chat with Kevin Newman, who's co-founder of Get Fact. Kevin, thank you so much for being here.
Amber, it's a pleasure. Good to see you again.
Okay, so I want to talk about Get Fact, but I also just want to introduce you to people who maybe aren't familiar with your very long career as a journalist. So tell us a little bit about your background before we get into what you're doing today.
Sure thing. I mean, I retired 5 years ago from CTV's W5, which is an investigative show in Canada, a little bit like 60 Minutes. And before that, I had a 4-decade-long career as a network anchor at ABC News in the United States. I was for a very brief amount of time, believe it or not, the host of Good Morning America. I said good morning to like 21 million people every day. And then I came home to Canada in 2001 and started a third national newscast called Global National, which I did for a decade. And along the way, I've always sort of had an interest in this intersection between technology and media and technology and journalism, as of course we're riding this wave of massive change in the information atmosphere. And so that's how I landed here. I got off my retirement couch in the back here, and along with Wilf Dinnick, who I've known from our days at Global National 20 years ago, we've created this startup.
Let's talk about the startup. It is called Get Fact, and you're doing incredible things. You are just launching. So, what was the reason behind wanting to launch what is really a community, but also you have a lot of technology baked in?
Yeah, so it was really President Trump's suddenly taking aim at Canada, to be honest. It was when he started talking about the tariffs, brought the tariffs in for a little while, took them off, put them in, took them off, they're in, and then started talking about Canada as a 51st state. And I thought to myself, I'd been aware, in my reporting and in my friendship groups about, how important misinformation has become in our information ecosphere here, and just how dominant it's become, and how dominant conspiratorial thinking has become in Canada, almost at the same level as it is in the United States. And so when the president started talking that way about Canada, I thought, ooh, if you add sort of his supporters in the United States, perhaps even, although we have no evidence of this yet, the elements of the American state to the misinformation that we're already having in Canada that's aimed at us from Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, that's a substantial increase in what could happen here. So Wilf and I were talking, and we said, like, we have to do something here. Like, there is some fact checking in the Canadian journalism circles, but it tends to not be rapid response. It tends to be, it takes a few days. It's written. Very little of it is in the video sphere. And so we thought maybe the skills that we have combined, both of us were television reporters, worked for American networks. Wilf worked at CNN as well as ABC. We thought maybe the skills that we have sort of put aside for a while have a reason for being again. And those skills are, being able to synthesize information quickly, check the facts of something, and then turn around a video response to that in real time on a daily deadline.
So I absolutely want to talk more about some of the tools that you're going to have as well, like an AI bot. But I wanted to kind of pull out this sentence that you wrote in a Substack, because I think it's really important for people to understand. Most Canadians, I think they know that news is blocked on Facebook and Instagram. Some of our friends south of the border may not know, but you wrote this sentence, which I think is so relevant in terms of what's happening today. A scam that can be posted on Facebook in Canada while the real CBC news cannot. What impact does this have in terms of some of these big social media sites blocking access to legitimate journalism?
It has been profound in Canada. The McGill Center for Democracy, I think, estimates that 11 million fewer exposures to real news in Canada just in 1 month. So, there's been a degradation in the news environment in Canada because of that. People don't necessarily realize it. They think they're getting more news, but what they're actually getting is more information and more opinion. We've kind of lost, in the same way that Xerox lost its brand to copying, right? You would say, we're going to Xerox something, meaning we're going to photocopy it. We've kind of lost the brand of news in Canada. People think news is things that they see on Instagram or things that influencers say. And it's not. That's information, but it's not news. It's not verified by multiple sources. So, I think that's part of what we're seeing. And we're seeing, even since the last election, we have an election going on in Canada right now. Even since the last election, the amount of consumption of what I would call sort of mainstream news, and that's newspapers and the networks, has gone down, 5 to 10%. And so we are living in an environment where there is less verified information, and that's something that we're hoping to address.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the measures to address these issues with misinformation and disinformation, because from what I've read so far, like I mentioned, there's an AI bot, there's a podcast, there are many different avenues. So what's the plan?
So the plan is to provide a portal for fact checking. And that portal will have 4 different channels. You mentioned a couple of them. One is this a podcast, which I've done the first episode on, and it's for longer conversations like this. We've got a new daily newsletter that we've been pumping out for a couple of weeks already that's getting good traction off Substack. We've got what I talked about, the content, and the content piece is We have about 100 volunteers, former television reporters, editors, graphic artists, researchers from universities who are coming together to put out videos on TikTok that will fact check the misinformation that's spreading on those places. So that's the video content element. But the real groundbreaking one, and the one we're frankly still struggling with, is a fact-checking bot. And the reason we think that matters is there's, as I said, a lot of the fact-checking that's going on in journalism currently is longer form. It's something you would sit down, you would read, on a laptop, let's say. But we thought we needed something that was faster. And a lot of people are using ChatGPT now to fact-check. And so they're getting into the habit of using AI already and language models to try to verify information and search for it. What we wanted to create was a bot that had the guardrails of established journalism prompted into it. So what we took the ethical guidelines from a couple of newsrooms that I've worked in, the ethical guidelines, the international guidelines on fact checking, on transparency, and how you go about verifying the validity of certain sources. And we prompted the LLM with that so that it would return an assessment of a story or a link that you would put into the search line and give you an assessment of what information has been verified, what information is partially verified, what information can't be verified, and what information there's just not enough context around to know. So the tricky thing with bots, as you know, Amber, is that they are kind of programmed to please us. They really want to provide an answer, even if sometimes that answer isn't right or has nuances that are wrong. So one of the things we had to be careful of, and we're still working with, and it will be an ongoing process, is teaching our bot to play in the gray. Don't be so determined to have a black and white answer. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know, or if there's nuances you're unsure of, say them, because that's ultimately what verification of journalism is like. We're trying to transfer, decades and centuries worth of journalistic practices and ethics into an LLM and see what comes out.
It's interesting. I was reading about the fact-checking bot. It is called Laura, if that is still the plan, and it is after Laura Secord. Tell me a little bit behind why it's named Laura, and there's a little bit of a nod to Canadian history here.
Yeah, it is. Canadians will know Laura Secord as a place for delicious chocolates and ice cream. But she was actually the heroine of the War of 1812. She would make her way over to the American side during the day, and the good thing about being Canadian is we can blend in pretty well, and knew and would pick up on intelligence from the American side in the War of 1812, and then late at night she would creep out and come and tell the British and Canadian and Iroquois soldiers what the plans of the Americans were. So we thought, well, she really was like an information line in the last major conflict between Canada and the United States, and here we find ourselves in a tariff war, and frankly, an information war as well. That if we're gonna name a bot that's going to help us sort through the intelligence, then Laura's a pretty good name.
It's interesting when we look at some of the chatbots that do exist today, and an area that we've certainly covered a lot on the show, and I have during my career, is the fact that most of them are coming out of Silicon Valley. Most of them are coming from some of the big tech titans. As much as people try to remove some of that bias, it's very difficult. Like Elon Musk has his Grok bot, which has a sense of humor, just like Elon Musk. Some of those things that maybe people don't want built into the chatbots that they're using to get information. So as you're building this, and you look to some of the challenges, you mentioned some of them, but what do you hope to get out of this? How will people use this on a regular basis?
It's a great point. And so we're going to roll out a version 1 of Laura that we think will give people a window into fact checking themselves. I think it's something that, when I talk to friends, and I'm sure you do too, I hear quite often, like, I don't know what to believe anymore. Right? Everything just seems to be questionable. I don't know who to trust. So what we're hoping to do, and there's some science behind this, people might be more willing to trust machine intelligence and human intelligence when it comes to fact checking. They may assume that the bias that humans bring to fact checking won't exist on machine intelligence. So there's actually a report out of Science that says that people are 20% more likely to believe an AI fact checker than a human one. So we're hoping that some of those people who still doubt, those people who are confused or lost in the amount of information that they're seeing, that they might say, I just want to know what part of this is verified, what part of this is less verified, so that I can judge for myself. And I hope it becomes a tool, frankly, a tool for information as the fog of war of information gets much thicker. And then, one of the things we're going to try in version 2 is we're going to try using other LLMs to judge the work of Laura and see whether or not they can tell us things about her own bias that we can then prompt out of her. So we're going to put machine against machine and have sort of a death match over fact checking and see if that increases the reliability of Laura. And then we're asking people to be involved with Laura as well. So as you know, sometimes these language models don't return things that make sense to you intrinsically and naturally as a human. So it's important that we have a feedback loop, and we're saying, tell us when Laura has a hiccup, because this is the only way she's going to learn in the long run.
So I'd love to dive into the audience of people who you are going after, because from what I've read, it is not everybody. I mean, it is true that there are those people who are too far down a rabbit hole in terms of conspiracy theories. They will be difficult to reach. So can you break down who you hope to bring on this journey with Get Fact?
Sure. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's, on the left and on the right, there are just people in their tribes. They're not really interested. They're having a different kind of experience. They're having a community experience of like-minded people and aren't interested in really changing it. But there is a large cohort in the middle, 80%, that to various degrees that still have some doubt in their minds and understand that, sometimes the world is more gray than it is black and white. So we're aiming for those people. Now they're not noisy. They're not the ones who are going to take me on, and they take you on, and they take everybody on. Our challenge is going to be to not be disrupted by that anger, and to remember that we're talking to the people in the middle who probably are quieter about their doubt and don't really know where to turn to sort that out. There hasn't really been. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the country right now about things we have to do, right? We've got to build pipelines, we've got to build infrastructure. There's a lot of talk, but one of the things that we really we wanted to bring something to market. We wanted a product that people could use, that we would learn from, and see whether or not this moment in time in Canada, when there's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of talk, whether a tool and a place to think about misinformation might land. Now, we've done this exactly opposite of the way that most startups are supposed to do. I mean, you know this better than anybody. You get an idea, you try to sell someone on the idea, you get a little angel capital, you get some money up front. We are an all volunteer organization. We have spent maybe $200 to this point, and we're bringing a product to market that will land, we hope, if all the things line up, will land as a whole product. Now, not a mature product, that's for sure, because you only get so far on free. But we've gone to about 100 volunteers who have come to us and said, give us 3 to 6 months. Let's see if this idea finds an audience. Let's see if this tool is helpful to people. And then, I'm going to be knocking on a lot of doors starting in about a week and saying, look, you all know how important information is in the ecosystem here. You know that if people stop believing that things are true, that every business has a problem, right? Every business, the stock market, people won't know if it's real. I mean, you begin to detach from reality. So here is a product, here's a tool that you can use right now for free to see whether or not it helps. And will you support that in a philanthropic way? Because we're a nonprofit at this point. So We'll see. We'll see if anybody responds to it. But the old saying, if you build it, they will come. Let's see. I'm not sure that'll happen.
I think you bring up a really good point, though, in terms of the erosion of trust that we've seen in our society today that's been happening over the past few years. One of the things that I think is worth noting is that there are some reasons that this is happening that are easy to quantify. We look at Meta, we see the fact that they're blocking news, we see that algorithms are, generally speaking, putting more hateful content and divisive content in front of people. But there is also a third factor that I've seen you write a little bit about recently, which is leaders who decide to weaponize some of this misinformation and disinformation, government leaders, or maybe some people in business. It is irresponsible. I think we both know that, spending a lot of time in the world of news. But when you have people who people traditionally have trusted and looked up to, who are now weaponizing this information, how much harder does that make your job at Get Fact?
Harder and easier. I mean, I think generally there is general distrust of authority in the country. And not only that, COVID made us quite conspiratorially minded. So people who are curious are doubtful. And that's a good thing. I don't know that that's a bad thing. Whether that's journalism, people don't trust news anchors the way they once did, business leaders. But I think it's become such a wash, and people have now drifted so far into distrust that our big bet is that they are looking for ways that they can learn to validate information themselves, because they don't really trust anyone else to do it for them. So, that's not the people on the edge that we were talking about, but there are people in the middle that are and they're just not sure how to do it. Like, how do you validate information? What are the sources? What is this stuff? And one of the good things about the bot will be it will kind of train people through using it in the process of verification that journalists like you and I have known and had baked into us for our entire careers.
I think it's impossible to look back over the past couple of decades and really blame one group of people for what is happening today. But I would really love your perspective as someone who's had so many decades working as a journalist, both here in Canada as well as the US, because I think it is true that news organizations have also been sort of slow to adapt to the realities of this time. I left mainstream media in 2005 out of frustration that they weren't really able to understand the effects that the internet was going to have on how people consumed media. So what do you think happened in terms of some of these large news organizations that I think it's fair to say have lost their way a little bit?
They did an experiment in exactly the way that you were encouraging them to do, and I was encouraging them to do. I went inside Bell Media as a digital news evangelist to try to, encourage experimentation. But as you know, it runs up against business models that they make money at, and they didn't have the imagination to believe that those business models would run out so quickly. And, people always act in their own self-interest. And so the attitude was mostly, well, I'll be out of here before the real bad stuff happens. So why would I want to innovate? And they judged innovation the wrong way. They would only innovate if they could make money day one. And that just never happens. Right? A TV show isn't a hit as soon as it comes out. Things need time in the content business, and they weren't willing to give it. It had to show that it could, if they were going to greenlight something, you had to have a business model they believed in that would earn profit year one. And if it didn't, then they weren't going to bother. Well, guess what? Almost nothing makes profit year one. It's new, right? Nothing. No business year one makes profit, and very few do anyway. Because they're still feeling their way. They're not sure what they are. They're, all the pivots that you do when you're an entrepreneur to figure out, what's going to work. But the big companies, the ones who could most afford innovation, did the least amount of it. And that's why they are where they are.
Yeah, I think that is very well said. I think we've seen that historically over the past couple of decades, that those organizations have been slow to change, and nobody really had that vision for what the future of news looked like, which has been at the detriment, I think, to many Canadians in terms of how they're consuming their news. I wanted to also pull out something that you wrote because I think this is very Canadian. You're so humble in this comment when you say that I am haunted by the possibility there may be no way to succeed at it, as in what you're doing at Get Fact. I mean, that's a reality, right? In terms of what you're going into.
Yeah, it's our information environment's a mess, really is, and there are so many vested interests trying to fight for our attention. I mean, it's about attention control, and there are bots that are, LLMs are now creating misinformation between themselves to like accelerate the degradation of our information environment. So, these 100 passionate, patriotic volunteers may not be able to make a difference, but someone has to try, right? And that's kind of where we are. It's like we're if Canada is at stake, and how we see the country, and our ability to defend it in our own minds is about to be compromised by superpowers that have the ability to leverage all of their power to try to convince us that Canada doesn't matter, border's not real, all that kind of stuff. If you're not going to get off a couch in your house in retirement and say, not in my watch, I'm going to try something, then that's kind of where we are.
I love this. A few more questions for you before I let you go, just to wrap up this conversation. One of the things, just as you're speaking, that I was thinking about is just the magnitude of this problem. I've certainly over the years tried to raise awareness about these issues, whether it's with world leaders, friends of mine, startup founders, business leaders, because I think, like you said, it does actually affect everyone. Why do you think it is that some people have been lagging on taking this issue so seriously and giving it the attention that it absolutely needs?
Because it's invisible, and it's insidious, and it kind of creeps around. And I mean, we've seen it. I bet you everybody who's listening to this has a friend or two that suddenly you notice, oh, you're changing. Your ideas are changing. People that you've been close to all your life are drifting into conspiratorial thinking, and so it happens. It's not like a tariff, right? That suddenly cars are 25% more expensive. It's insidious, and so and governments have been reluctant to fund it. It was always a nice to have, not a need to have. Because they never admitted to the public how much of it is going on. It's like cyber attacks. Like, we don't have any idea, really. I mean, we know there's 1 billion attacks trying to destabilize Canada a day, but we never hear about them because companies generally don't like to talk about when they've suffered a cyber attack. So the general public knows it's there. They don't really understand how the battle for the hearts and minds of Canadians is on, and that there has been an information war now for about a decade, and that we are succumbing to it. And so I'm hoping, now that the threat to the country is existential, and that that really, other than the economic war, which is real, and you can see that there's a growing recognition that the information war is where we really do have to fight, and where we have to develop resilience in the population. And if getfact.ca can be part of building that resilience so that you have a place when you doubt something you can go, then, I'll go back to my couch a happy man.
Excellent. Just one or two more questions for you. When you look at the information landscape that exists today, Are there any winners? I mean, is this an opportunity if some of the big media players have sort of failed at some parts of providing information to their audiences? Is there an opportunity for local news? Is there an opportunity for independent creators? Any winners in this fractured state of information?
I think podcasts are winners. I really do. There is clearly a hunger for a meaningful conversation, and that the mainstream networks have stopped providing largely. I mean, when I was in, most of the podcasts they put out are just audio recordings of stuff they're already doing. They're not any genuine podcasts. So I think there's opportunity there. And you know what? These language models are solving all kinds of problems suddenly. We were speaking to somebody at Google yesterday. They gave us some startup credits. Thank you, Google. And they were saying there's just so many incredible businesses being built on these language models now to solve everyday problems and make things happen so much easier. So that's kind of what our inspiration was for Laura. Let's see if we can attach this brand new technology to an age-old and very current problem, and that's the verification of what's really going on. And we'll see if it turns into a business eventually. Maybe it will, but first we have to see whether Canadians are sufficiently doubtful to pick it up and go to Get Fact and see whether or not it's helpful to them and how we can make it more helpful.
Get Fact will be launching this April, so head over to getfact.ca for more information and to sign up.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Before our next segment, here's a message from one of our partners.
The MasterCard and Peer 5 Small Business Fund provides women small business owners with access to funding and valuable opportunities, including community building to help them scale their businesses. 10 small business owners were selected to receive $10,000 each in funding and access to a priceless experience to help them grow their businesses and connect with mentors and MasterCard experts. I had the pleasure of moderating one of the sessions during the Priceless Experience event, and I shared key takeaways on my blog about how MasterCard is empowering Canada's small businesses. Visit ambermac.com to read the article and visit mastercard.ca/smallbusiness to learn more.
Artificial intelligence is disrupting our lives and making our lives better at the same time. To chat further about this topic, Amber speaks to one of the top media thinkers in Canada about today's evolving AI landscape.
AI Spotlight.
Mohit, thanks for being here.
Amber, always a pleasure to speak to you.
We have known each other for a very long time, and I know what you do, but this term meteorologist is new to me. So let's start there. What does this mean?
It's really a culmination of all of my experience boiled into one. I've been somebody that's been at the forefront and watching media grow and expand from analog days right to digital, and then also watching how the world started to become connected and connected culture. And seeing and following people like yourself, I started to realize this isn't going to be just about a pop culture moment. This isn't just about VHS to DVDs. This is really about the next few generations and how they were going to communicate and learn and how our kids are going to be affected. So now I've come to this point in my life where I realize there's a lot from the places that I've worked that are probably better suited to help people not make the same mistakes. And so I follow trends in media now and see what's happening so that I can help people, guide people, and future-proof what they want to do in this business.
One of the things we want to focus on today is AI and all of the different AI tools that are out there. So let's start with the options. There are a few big players. So set the scene for all of us.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, most people are talking about tools that are being developed by one of five companies, whether it's Google, it's OpenAI, it's Microsoft, it's aspects of NVIDIA on the gaming side, and it's Claude, which is Anthropic. But there are more too. And what I'm noticing in all of these is that they've all got this wonderful amount of speed and ability to release products, but I don't always know what problems they're solving for. So it's become a little bit of a communications nightmare when it comes down to using some of these products. I've used beta, for example, there are apps that are being built in these ecosystems that for 1 month will be the star app that everybody wants to be using, like in OpenAI, a GPT that's created there. And then the next month it's null and void because something bigger and better is out there. So what we're seeing right now, Amber, is this race for utility by these AI companies that are actually trying to get into separate fields to show their validity. Google's doing really great with their AI when it comes to the medical field. You're watching NVIDIA doing amazing stuff when it comes down to gaming. And of course, you're also looking at Microsoft because they've been so ingrained in office culture for such a long time. So there's a lot to unpack in all of these improvements that are happening in AI these days.
When we talk about AI, I think about all of the different tools, but I think one of the most interesting questions is what are you actually using, Mohit? Like, what do you actually use day to day and put your fingers on?
Yeah, this is what's I'm really into the generative side of what we're doing with AI, just to try to figure out where this world really is on everything from ethics to actual input. So, for example, the world sort of AI world was taken for a little bit of a spin recently with something called DeepSeek, because that took, in an instance, it really showed what the last 18 months AI companies have been talking about, these building these data centers, et cetera, et cetera. And it really shook them up and said, you really don't need that much computer speed and that much power in order to be able to operate these big models. Why I think that's important is because as a user, now I would think, yes, DeepSeek makes more sense for the future. It might not be owned in the US or in Canada or whatever, but that's not the point. The point is we're starting to see all of these companies sort of trip on each other in this ascension. And so I'll go back to your original question, which is when I look at DeepSeek, it opens another sort of window of possibility. But when I go back to the tools that I've been using for the last year, I got to say that it's been easiest to create GPTs and personal GPTs within OpenAI because their improvements have been user-based. So it's a lot of user feedback. They've got millions of users, so they're building in real time. Whereas with Microsoft, I found it a little cumbersome because many companies are still lost in the legality of what they're using and the information that they're using and how it's being reused in order to make reports. So each one siloed and actually used, I've noticed there's several different things happening. You have to continually learn. You can't stop for, once you've got, I'll give you an example. Sorry, I'm talking a lot now. My certifications on my original Microsoft AI tools are already expired because of how quickly this is moving. And so we are at this precipice where you have these companies that want you to jump on board from Google to Microsoft, et cetera, but it's really not clear yet about the path to take that'll keep you in the long game.
Yeah, there is also the concern, I think, of that digital divide that exists. I see this in workplaces where some people understand how to use the tools and some people don't understand how to use the tools. And so what you end up getting is people who are doing a job that they're using AI to help them as sort of a companion that is taking them a fraction of the time that someone who isn't using AI is doing. That worries me a lot in terms of sort of a consistent overall training among teams.
I think it changes culture as well. And when you consider how many people will feel undermined in the process, they think about the massive graphics department at an agency or people who need to storyboard for an animation company. I I'm really, I've been thinking about this, rethinking with AI when it comes down to the affecting the film and television industry and how it can, on one hand, explode as more people having access to be able to make more films and more stories out there. And on the other hand, it's going to require less people to be from costume to storyboarding to thing, along the way. It's a lot of different industries involved. And so I think the culture of every industry is going to dictate how the adoption really happens. But like you and I have already seen, there's a younger workforce that definitely loves to adapt to things quicker. We're not typecasting them, but my son, for example, who's the youngest in our family, was only interested in the fact that he could create worlds by prompting with AI in his gaming systems, right? And Other than that, everything Dad's spoken about so far, he doesn't care about. He's like, "Oh, great, you made a 5-second video, Dad. What? Who cares?" I'm like, "This is Spider-Man. Like, I made it in my." And he's like, "No, I don't care." So it just goes to show it's our interest levels too. But Amber, does it not worry you? I need to ask you this: the world that is the internet is not properly archived, and so we've got two separate issues, in my opinion, that are happening. One, we can excel with artificial intelligence and start to become better and get 5 hours in our week back and start to feel better unanimously about that. But on the other hand, from when the internet started to now, even Canada as a whole doesn't have a proper documentation of where what is when it comes down to our history, our culture, the impact and all that stuff. Where does that go in the world of AI? Where does that go when the website doesn't exist anymore and the record doesn't exist because nobody documented properly? That's the stuff that's scaring me now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that absolutely is scary. I think there's a lot about the state of AI right now that is frightening. I mean, if you want to go down these terrifying paths, we can talk about things like AI warfare, which is absolutely devastating if you think about the ease at which things like killer drones are able to leverage artificial intelligence on the battlefield. There are just the layer upon layer. And I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to the fact that we need really savvy people, both in government, but also within private industry, to be leading the way on this front. And we do need those guardrails in place. I have always been endlessly frustrated about the fact that for some reason in the technology sector, it's almost like there are just no rules for engagement, right? People can just do what they want. And we've had this for many, many years, and we don't have that in any other industry, right? And it's amazing what the tech industry gets away with.
Yeah, I think you're right. And having a front row seat like you've had and been able to see all the mistakes that are being made along the way, we've both tapped into certain things and been like, this is free and just out here. You know what I mean? How is this? Why? And this could be problematic. And I think when it comes down to studies that'll look back, it will be very much like, but the warnings were all there, right? And we but conversations like this are so important, Amber, because there is a massive amount of fear mongering. There's a massive amount of job shifting and career shifting is on the horizon, and nothing's going to be resolved by just having these conversations sporadically. So I do appreciate you giving a venue to it as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the least we can do, is have these conversations, help to demystify some of these technology terms. I know that's something you do all the time. For people who want more information about what you're doing on a daily basis, is thinkstart.ca the place to go?
Yeah, or you can just Google my name, just spell it properly, Mohit Rajans, and you can find me wherever online.
Now you're going to have to spell Rajans. You realize that after saying that.
That's okay. It's Rajhans.
There you go.
Thanks, Mohit and Amber, for that conversation. That's all for today's show. And thanks again for all of your downloads, reviews, comments, and subscriptions.
As always, you can see our show notes and more information over at theambermaxshow.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
You're listening to The Amber Max Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.